The worldwide need for disaster response is growing. The National Intelligence Council estimates 42 million people globally need emergency humanitarian assistance. That number is likely to rise. To meet these needs, members of the NGO community are finding themselves in increasingly dangerous situations. Those who provide help sometimes work in extreme conditions. Living in dangerous areas, they're exposed to numerous threats. Armed with only their wits and relationships in the communities where they live, they face situations that range from theft and kidnapping to landmines and unexploded ordnances. NGOs are often the first organizations providing assistance, easing suffering, meeting basic needs, and building self-sufficiency that leads to long-term development and security. Hi, I'm Richard Holbrooke. In the last 40 years, I've worked with members of the NGO community in many countries. While representing the United States on official assignments, I've seen aid workers under fire in wars on 3 continents. I've seen them sacrifice everything, even their lives, to help others. They are, at their best, among the bravest men and the bravest women on earth. The world needs them, and the military needs to understand what they do and how to help them while the military fulfills its own primary missions. The NGO community is complex and confusing to many people, even to those of us who've worked with NGOs for many years. It is confusing. But in military operations, you're going to find yourself side by side with unarmed civilians representing many different organizations from many parts of the world with many points of view. It is essential to understand each other. We're going to explore this complex relationship. Let's start at the beginning. What is an NGO?
NGO is an acronym for non-governmental organizations, and examples of those would be organizations like Save the Children, my own organization, CARE International, Salvation Army, World Vision, the International Rescue Committee. The NGOs work to relieve suffering, promote the interests of the poor, protect the environment, I would say provide basic social services. They undertake community development and other related activities. They're typically value-based organizations.
In the past decade, NGOs have become increasingly professionalized with very well-trained staff who are specialists in the sectors in which they're working. But the core values of an NGO remain very important to the organizations, and they're usually committed to a sense of service for the people we're serving, to oftentimes a commitment to advocacy, to bringing to the world's attention the plight of the people we're serving, and to basically alleviating poverty or suffering. In a relief situation, the military will often come across NGOs who are providing basic services, including emergency food distribution, construction of emergency shelter, providing basic health care, and trying as quickly as possible to move those into longer-term development projects.
Grassroots would be a term that would typically describe NGOs working in the field. And it really means that NGOs in the field partner with local organizations, drawing on their expertise, knowledge of culture and conditions that are relevant in that particular area. This approach allows NGOs to adapt their programs to meet the needs of the people they are assisting and working with in the areas. Close relations with the local community also helps to ensure the security of the staff. Most NGOs, as they do their work, and they do hold this very strongly, hold the values of neutrality, independence, and impartiality, whether or not they are religious or secular.
The core values which most NGOs have are our neutrality, impartiality, and independence. It's very important that we are not identified with the military when working in the field, because if people see us like collaborating with the military, they may associate us with their enemies.
You will encounter both national and international NGOs in the field. An international NGO is one that works in many countries. They can employ literally thousands of individuals in different countries around the world. A national NGO is one that is part of the civil society of that particular country. They can often be much smaller or more dedicated to a particular sector.
NGOs are funded really with a variety of funding sources. A lot of us rely on contracts from the United Nations or the U.S. government or other major governments, so we get direct funding in the form of grants. We also receive funding from foundations and corporations, and the main way we try to attract funding is from public donations.
Some NGOs will reject funding from certain sources because that particular NGO may feel that it may compromise their independence, their neutrality, and their impartiality. The two arenas that the NGO community, both international and national, will embrace would be broken into advocacy and operations. Okay, I would define advocacy as trying to affect policy changes through a number of ways: research, reports, interaction with leaders in government and international organizations. Operations for the NGO community mean meeting basic needs through relief and development work.
The categories of operational work within the direct assistance that we provide can vary. It can be from taking care of survival needs, immediate water and sanitation needs, disease control, outbreak control, water and sanitation programs, emergency shelter. There's really a variety, vaccination programs. These are some urgent ones.
The values and principles that the NGOs universally embrace, I would say, are neutrality, independence, and impartiality. I think those are the basic values and principles for the community.
NGOs function under several sort of principles or codes. We all adhere to the International Federation of the Red Cross and non-governmental organization code of conduct. It's 10 codes that basically outline the ethos of our work, and those codes include things like independence, that we should not be tools of a government, that we provide assistance on the basis of need, that we are impartial, that is, we're non-discriminatory. We serve all people in need regardless of race, religion, political orientation, ethnicity.
Misconceptions about the NGOs and the way how they're structured is usually a problem for the areas where NGOs and military are working alongside, because generally military is not aware how NGOs are structured and who is in charge for the humanitarian issues. That's kind of the misconceptions that cause problems on a daily basis.
You've heard what NGOs are. Now let me stress what NGOs are not. NGOs are not part of the United Nations. The UN is an international organization composed of over 190 member nations. However, the UN does have many international aid and humanitarian workers in the field as well, in such organizations as UNICEF, the World Food Program, and the UN High Commission for Refugees. NGOs are distinct from other international organizations. They are independent groups. They're created by concerned citizens. They work in every field of civil society. Groups such as the International Committee of the Red Cross carry unique mandates from governments through special instruments like the Geneva Convention. They provide assistance to civilians in a neutral, impartial, and independent manner. The following may make understanding NGOs less confusing. First, you will come in contact with NGOs involved in relief operations. They may be international or national in origin. Both international and national NGOs work directly with those in need, often forming partnerships that allow local communities to participate in the design of assistance programs. This is an essential part of nearly every operational NGO. Funding for NGOs comes from a variety of sources, and NGOs often find themselves in high-risk operations. NGOs highly value neutrality, independence, and impartiality. They provide help regardless of race, culture, religion, gender, or political beliefs. I recently heard a story about two kids who grew up a block away from each other. They both studied engineering. One entered the military service, and the other served in the Peace Corps. 5 years after college graduation, they ran into each other again, in Kosovo after the 1999 war. One was helping to organize disaster relief. The other was serving as part of the International Peacekeeping Force. Two people with similar childhood and education, taking different paths but ending up in the same place, both experiencing difficult living conditions far from their families. Each found themselves in dangerous working environments. They knew full well they could be injured or killed. What they still had in common was a shared desire for a challenging career and a continued desire to draw satisfaction from public service. But there are also important differences. One carries a weapon, the other does not. One represents a government, the other strives to remain independent and impartial. Two very similar people from different organizational cultures, both essential to establish peace and stability in a troubled region.
I think one of the things which is important to understand about military organizations, and the Army in particular, which is the one I know best, is that we are obviously organized in a hierarchy, and there is a chain of command from the most senior person present down to the individuals who make things happen on the ground. So we are hierarchical in structure. We do a lot of pre-deployment training. In other words, we train our people to perform the missions, whether they be in combat or in support operations. We try to train them as extensively as we can before we put them into the situation. The chain of command understands the mission. We have policies and procedures which we would like to think would cover most everything, every situation that the soldiers would come in contact with. We actually have rules of engagement, how you will respond given certain stimuli. Now, in addition to all of that, when we look at a mission and create a plan, we try to think of the end state. That is, what's the desired outcome here?
Both the military and civilian organizations, the NGOs, have their own culture that they come from, and the two are somewhat of an unlikely marriage. Organizationally, the authority relationships and the structure are really quite distinct. Military organizations are sort of characterized by a discipline and a conformity. NGOs, on the other hand, pride themselves in their innovativeness, their nimbleness and flexibility, so we don't have as much conformity not only within an organization but between organizations. You'll find they function very differently, have varied missions, similar but not the same missions.
There was an example of a very important NGO initiative that shows really the power of how we are able to organize collectively, and that's something called the Sphere Project, which is an effort within the NGO community to become more responsible and more accountable in our work. The Sphere Project was developed and initiated and is now managed basically by a network of networks, and interaction along with its sister networks from Europe and the developing world have come together to govern this basically global project to improve our collective ability to understand this work that we're engaged in and how to do it better.
So NGOs do work together, and again, quite often it is the rule. But where it becomes different is that the NGO operate organizationally independent of each other. It's similar to a business. Many different companies do the same thing, but they go about it in slightly different ways. The NGO community does not have a central chain of command. Of course, each NGO has its own organizational structure with what we call a line of authority rather than a chain of command. Field officers and program coordinators report to mission heads, just as subordinates in the military report to seniors through situation reports, as an example. This organizational structure puts most of the decision-making in the hands of highly trained field workers.
In terms of organizational structures, leadership structures, and authority structures, the military is very hierarchical. You really can trace a chain of command. Among NGOs in the field, what would be very frustrating for people with a military perspective is looking for that chain of command in a very decentralized operation. Non-governmental organizations are proud of the fact that they do operate in disparate ways with many points of authority in a decentralized structure, so it's really different. It really lacks a command and control, and it's more often a consensus.
My understanding is that military training is quite intensive pre-deployment, and it very much mirrors their structure in that you are trained to do certain things a certain way within that chain of command. Given the differences within how NGOs are organized, our training is necessarily different. We have quite a few people within our community who we hire because of their sector expertise. They know health, they know shelter, they know food, nutrition, food distribution. But we also need people who are problem solvers and who can operate very independently in the many, many different and challenging environments in which they work.
In terms of instructional documents, texts, manuals, as I understand it, the military has a pretty impressive array of resources that they have available pre-departure and for training in the field and for use in the field. NGOs are increasingly having more technical and procedural manuals, and the profession of humanitarian assistance is becoming increasingly professionalized.
Our whole approach is to try and look at the root causes of the problem, trying to get people in the communities to work together, and that's an assessment process that takes a lot of time. And usually, things at the beginning, when the emergency is on, it's not really that clear, what is the solution to the problem. So, working with the community leaders and trying to really discuss each side, we're able to develop a longer-term developmental approach to the problem.
There is a certain degree of camaraderie that we share with the NGOs. Many of them are actually ex-military themselves, and that says a lot in their character. They all have a selfless dedication to service, and also a greater concern for their fellow man. These are some of the key characteristics that I see shared in both of us. The other riding concern is a desire to provide a service and to leave a positive footprint on the area that they operate in. And I've actually had a very positive experience, and not to provide a canned answer, but I actually look forward to the next deployment.
And no matter how much preparation you do before you come here, there's always going to be those first few weeks where you're going to do something that might unintentionally irk the NGOs, but it's just all part of the learning process, and there's really nothing you can do about it no matter how much you prepare. But over time you'll get to understand how they operate, and they'll understand you because they've seen people come here before you, and they'll see people after you.
And I think the challenge is to make sure that these two organizations, that is the military organization and the non-governmental organization, some of whom aren't even American, or lots of them, that we bridge this institutional gap as well as the cultural gap. And that's a real challenge. And I think it can be overcome, the challenges, the hindrances to working effectively, but you have to work at it, and you have to train. You have to understand each other, and you have to respect each other.
So NGOs and military personnel may find that they share a similar motivation to perform a public service. They both appreciate the challenge of their jobs. Each must endure separation from home and family. Often they work in difficult living conditions with great risk of danger. However, there's often a lack of understanding of the differences between NGOs and the military. NGOs are independent, and they have a decentralized authority. The military has a highly disciplined and hierarchical command structure. NGO personnel usually train on the job in the field. The military trains extensively before they ever reach the field. Individual NGO agencies produce their own publications, detailing their own procedures, while the military uses standardized manuals. Finally, NGOs are often already on the ground and responding before the military arrives. Many will remain after the military has left. The military uses an end-state approach. NGOs are not committed to any specific outcome and encourage the participation of the local population. The UN, the U.S. government, foreign governments, and donors all depend on NGOs to carry out their humanitarian missions. These donors and organizations recognize that NGOs are partners, not subordinates or contractors. Often referred to as implementing partners, NGOs design and deliver assistance.
NGOs many times work in areas where there's no military presence because they do tend to get to the field long before the military arrives. What protects them while they're in the field is really their core values of neutrality. Because they are not biased towards any particular group, everybody accepts them, and they do realize that what they are providing is relief and benefit to both sides of the conflict. The military is often perceived to take sides by the local population, and this does often make them targets. NGOs' association with the military can also make them targets.
I think it's important to emphasize that different NGOs have different comfort levels when it comes to working directly with the military. Some NGOs will utilize their resources to help transport supplies and materials to beneficiaries in need. Some NGOs will participate in convoys to certain areas. Other NGOs don't want to really work separately because they don't want to see any association between their staff and the military at all. I think that's an important point that everybody needs to understand, that different NGOs operate differently, and each situation kind of dictates, what type of level of cooperation can exist.
I think when you're in the area, when you're in the Balkans or Africa or wherever you might be, even in the United States, the Army, National Guard, or the regular Army finds itself in situations where something has happened that really is outside of the purview of a soldier. It's clearly not within a military context. If it's in an overseas area, then immediately the military unit should report that to competent authorities. Now, the liaison between the military unit and the non-governmental organization may be in the civil affairs part of the organization, or it may be just contacting the NGO, the head of the local representative, and saying, hey, I got a problem here. I don't know really what's going on, but you better come over here and look at it, because it's out of our purview. And that's one of the things that we will train our soldiers to do. That is, if this, then this. Because we clearly know that there are some things which are just not within our competency to address, and appropriate civilian leadership is needed. And I would note, by the way, that non-governmental organizations are important and vital partners in this effort. They are not to be seen as hindrances to this taking place.
Collaborating with the military could cause local populations to see NGOs as agents of a foreign country. Therefore, NGOs don't cooperate with intelligence gathering for the military. This has very bad effects, seriously hindering access to local populations and potential to turn NGOs into targets. Many NGO field workers have been killed by combatants who came to believe field workers were assisting their enemies.
Where there's an incompatibility or a rub, or a place where NGOs and military don't match, and something that NGOs certainly try to avoid, is association with the military, because they're seen as partisan. They're seen as part of the conflict. We are very deliberate in conveying our distance from the conflict, that we are distinct from people who fight. We like to differentiate ourselves in very obvious, visible means.
NGOs will resist too close of an involvement with the military in the field because we fear that our longer-term ability to work in that area will be too compromised. For that reason, we will also resist being part of a very close command structure. We understand the desire to coordinate and the desire to create order out of these chaotic situations, but we need to find ways to do that that doesn't compromise our ability to work. We're always mindful of the effect that military involvement will have on our core values and how the local communities perceive us.
There are real concerns NGOs have when they work with the military. In fact, it's easy to see why many non-governmental organizations resist working with the military. Some NGOs are concerned that involvement with the military could compromise them, that the military will try to dominate a humanitarian effort, and that the military will seek to use NGOs to gather intelligence. They believe that association with the military can compromise the impartiality and security of NGOs. To deal with these concerns, it's important to remember three key aspects of all humanitarian efforts. First, the military is not operating in a vacuum. They're operating in an environment already filled with international and local players, projects, and systems. The military is just one player in a scenario that includes refugee and humanitarian delivery, civil society strengthening, democracy building, conflict resolution, development, education, and many other activities. Second, control of humanitarian efforts is in the hands of NGOs and other civilian organizations. The military should not attempt to control NGO activities, but they should coordinate their efforts through the appropriate civilian humanitarian coordination mechanisms. Third, the appropriate response when a military unit comes across a humanitarian situation is to refer the incident to the appropriate military-civilian affairs coordination unit. After that referral, the military's job is complete, unless the military is asked for further assistance and is able to provide it. That leads us to one last important point, perhaps the most critical for the military working side by side or near NGO personnel. There are times when non-governmental organizations may make requests of the military. These requests will fall into several areas.
Although NGOs don't want to get associated with the military, they may request security for a region which would allow them to reach people in highly dangerous areas. The military is not asked to be a security force for NGO personnel, but only to provide overall safety and secure environment for our work and for population who are in need. It is very rare, but NGOs may also require evacuation of their personnel. I faced many situations in the beginning of the war in Bosnia when my colleagues were evacuated from the region because heavy shelling or fights were expected. Also, very often NGOs may request security briefing from the military to help them avoid conflicts, mines, unexploded ordnance, and other dangers.
NGOs may request the convoy escorts to the remote areas or the security of these convoys. The military is usually helping the NGOs in the road repairs and the different infrastructure projects. These types of requests are going through the civilian branch of the military services, and usually coordinated in the certain meetings where these special departments of the military are working and coordinating overall programs in the area with the NGOs.
The military does have the capability to provide security, and in some cases, and we did it in Somalia, I know we did it a lot, we would in fact go out and rescue people. And one of the bravest people I know, and I know that because the infantryman of the 10th Mountain Division told me that, was a young woman who worked for one of the NGOs. And she was providing a service at great risk to her own life, serious risk to her own life. And the infantrymen were proud to sort of be there to help her when she needed it, although they didn't go in with her, but they did go in a couple of times and get her out of there without injury to herself or to themselves, but it took some fighting to do it. So at any rate, we can do that, and we're willing to do that if, you know, that's what's needed. And we also provide briefings to ourselves anyway on a daily basis. Okay, this is the situation here within these towns, and all of those briefings are open and available to everybody. But it's helpful that everybody understands that before we go in, which is why I think some of the training, pre-deployment training, or certainly skull sessions, once the military and the NGOs are together, are really critical. And that's why the Civilian Military Operations Center, the CMOC, where you bring all of the organizations together, is an important organizational fix.
The kinds of things that NGOs are likely to want assistance with are usually in the area of security, wanting militaries, and this isn't always the case, but sometimes they do want military assistance in securing areas and making travel routes secure and general safe passage. And then in the area of logistics or transport, airlift, for example, and finally in terms of engineering projects, infrastructural repairs, bridges, roads, repairs of buildings, gravity, water systems, things like that.
So NGOs will request help from the military. However, they will expect support to be provided in a manner which does not violate their core values. Typical requests NGOs may make of the military include overall security for an area and security briefings that help NGOs make informed decisions. NGOs want reliable contacts should they need evacuation from a dangerous situation or after an injury. Convoy escorts are sometimes requested as long as they can be provided in a way that avoids the impression that NGOs are associated with military operations. The military may be asked to facilitate access to remote areas, ports, and airfields by repairing transport infrastructure. Logistical assistance may be requested for the rapid construction of massive refugee camps or the delivery of critically needed humanitarian supplies or air traffic control at stressed airfields. Additionally, NGOs may ask the military to assist in the location and clearance of landmines. These requests should first pass through a civil-military coordination unit. It's important to remember that the military is just one component of an effort that engages many others. Obviously, peacekeeping will be a major element, but a U.S. or international relief and recovery mission includes a wide spectrum of projects, including humanitarian aid delivery, civil society strengthening, democracy building, conflict resolution, and economic development. Humanitarian response activities are under the control of civilian organizations, not the military. The appropriate response when a military unit comes across a humanitarian situation is to refer the incident to a military-civilian affairs coordination unit. At that point, the military has done its job unless they're asked to provide further assistance to NGOs.
I think it's important that everybody understand that the end state everybody desires is a reasonable quality of life for people in the affected area. And it's mandatory that all of the parties who are providing a service work together to ensure that we bring back a reasonable quality of life to the people in the disaster area, the crisis area, whatever. And that we understand that there are cultural differences between these organizations, military and non-governmental organizations. And that we understand that, accept it, appreciate it, and work around it to bring stability and some degree of quality of life appropriate to the crisis area.
Remember, NGOs operate outside the military command structure. They're independent organizations, much like independent businesses. With this in mind, do not expect them to answer to a central authority. They don't and they won't. It's important to consult with NGOs when you're dealing with humanitarian or developmental issues. They have a deep understanding of the political and economic, the cultural and social environment in which they work. Without such an understanding, there's a risk the military might inadvertently do more harm than good. Respect the NGO community's core values, and remember at all times, NGOs cannot be used as intelligence gatherers. Finally, the degree to which NGOs and the military will work effectively together relates directly to the degree of mutual respect they have for each other. NGOs serve as the implementing partners of international and national organizations, as well as private and individual donors. They're not tangential to the delivery of humanitarian aid. They are absolutely essential. Because of this, NGOs should not be viewed by the military as roadblocks. Rather, NGOs should be viewed as experts in humanitarian aid, able to use their knowledge to provide life-saving assistance in an appropriate and efficient manner. It's clear, then, NGOs are essential to the successful completion of peacekeeping and humanitarian operations.